For over half a century, fans have speculated, whispered in hushed circles, and scanned every lyric, every line, searching for clues to a question that lingered in the air like smoke. What does Bob Dylan really think of Neil Young? They were never quite rivals, never quite friends. Two poets with parallel paths, forever linked, yet rarely crossing. And through it all, Dylan remained silent. Decades of mystery, decades of restraint. But now, at 83, Dylan finally breaks the silence. And what he says may just rewrite everything we thought we knew. Bob Dylan and Neil Young. Two giants. Two voices of a generation. Both poets. Both rebels. But never quite partners. Though they've shared stages, swapped tributes, and carved parallel paths through the annals of rock history, their relationship has always been defined by a mystifying blend of mutual respect and personal distance. They were never rivals in the traditional sense. Young, the defiant drifter who followed his muse down electric roads and acoustic back trails. Both men shaped eras, defied expectations, and refused to be tamed by fame or formulas. They admired each other from afar. Neil once referred to himself as a mere student of Bob Dylan in his biography Shaky, although many believe that's Neil being modest or playfully self-deprecating. Dylan, on the other hand, rarely commented directly on Neil, letting his silence speak volumes. And yet, they intersected often, on festival stages, benefit concerts, and in the hearts of fans who saw them as two sides of the same revolutionary coin. Neil Young even channeled Dylan's classics as calls for peace, borrowing his poetic thunder from modern causes. So while they never walked hand in hand, their shadows often overlapped. And that, in the world of legends, might be the deepest kind of kinship. For decades, Bob Dylan said almost nothing concrete about Neil Young. In the rare moments someone asked, he'd dodge the question with a grin, a shrug, or one of those famously cryptic one-liners that meant everything and nothing. Neil's doing what Neil does, he once said in the 90s, offering no context, no follow-up. Was that praise? A brush-off? No one knew. And Neil would drop subtle nods in interviews, calling Dylan the master, acknowledging his influence, but never digging deeper. It was respectful, distant, cautious even. There was never drama, but also never closeness. Over time, the silence itself became a mystery fans couldn't resist. They scoured liner notes. They dissected lyrics. Was Dylan's Highlands, with its talk of wandering, miscommunication, and misconnections, a veiled nod to Neil? Was Neil's Peace Trail, or Ambulance Blues, quietly aimed at Bob? It became a kind of folklore, an unofficial side story in rock history. Two men, two songwriters, circling each other across decades, never colliding, never confirming. Even when they did appear on the same bill, like that legendary 1975 joint tour that never fully materialized, it felt like the universe teasing us. Close, but not quite. To some, their silence spoke volumes. To others, it was just two artists respecting each other from afar, too proud, too private, or too different to say more. But fans never stopped wondering, what did Bob Dylan really think of Neil Young? And why hadn't he ever said it? Then came the moment that stopped the music world in its tracks. June 2025. Bob Dylan, now 83, gave a rare, almost mythical interview with a small European publication while promoting his latest book, a collection of essays, sketches, and quiet reflections on life, art, and time. The interview was meandering, poetic, typical Dylan. He talked about railroad sounds, old movies, and forgotten blues singers. But then, almost out of nowhere, the interviewer asked the question fans had wondered about for years. What do you think of Neil Young? And Dylan finally answered, Neil's a one-of-a-kind. He's the only one who never tried to be anyone but himself. That's rare. Most people, especially musicians, are mirrors. Neil's a flame. Bob Dylan, 2025. 8 one-words, and yet they say more than entire biographies. Neil's a flame. Think about that. A flame isn't polished. It flickers. It dances. It destroys. It illuminates. And it never, ever imitates. And in Dylan's own words, most musicians, they're mirrors. They reflect. They borrow. They echo what the world wants from them. But not Neil. For Dylan to use that metaphor is no accident. Dylan, who spent his life dodging labels, fleeing from commercial expectations, knows the weight of artistic integrity. So when he calls Neil Young a flame, he's not just giving a compliment. He's handing him a torch. And that torch means something profound. That was it. No long praise. No elaborate story. Just a few words, but words that carried decades of silence, admiration, and unspoken kinship. Simple, profound, and unmistakably Dylan. To call someone a flame, from Dylan, is high praise. A flame isn't just light. It's heat. It's dangerous. It dances. It resists control. It can comfort you on a cold night or burn down everything you thought was solid. A flame lives on its own terms. When Dylan called Neil Young a flame, he wasn't just talking about passion. He was talking about integrity, about unpredictability, about someone who doesn't follow trends but burns his own trail, even if it means being misunderstood. In Dylan's world, authenticity is sacred. He's a man who's reinvented himself 100 times, not to fit in, but to stay true. And that's exactly what he sees in Neil Young. A kindred spirit who's never bowed to the industry, never apologized for being raw, jagged, or difficult to define. Most people are mirrors, Dylan said. It's a quiet indictment. Mirrors reflect whatever stands in front of them. They echo what's popular, what's safe, what sells. But Neil, he's a flame. He creates his own light, even if it scorches. In that one line, Dylan summed up what critics, fans, and fellow musicians have tried to capture for decades. That Neil Young is more than a musician. He's a force. A restless spirit who never traded truth for applause. And coming from Bob Dylan, that's not just praise. That's legacy speaking to legacy. Together, these two never walked the same road, but their paths were always parallel. Dylan, with his surreal poetics and elusive persona. Young, with his raw vulnerability and defiant honesty. Different instruments, same fire. For decades, fans speculated about tension, silence, or philosophical distance between them. But in reality, they were always quietly aligned, each holding a mirror to a fractured world through songs that refused to be tamed. Dylan was the architect of folk revolution. Young, the restless spirit who kept pushing rock's boundaries. And now, with Dylan's rare and heartfelt words calling Neil a flame, the mystery softens. It wasn't about rivalry. It was respect in its purest, most unspoken form. Their connection wasn't built on collaboration. It was built on kinship, mutual defiance, a shared allergy to pretense. They didn't need to stand side by side to understand each other. They burned brightly in their own lanes, casting long shadows on the generations that followed. In the end, Dylan's recognition of Neil isn't just personal. It's historical. It seals their legacies, not as competitors, but as twin icons of authenticity who shaped not just music, but the meaning of being true in a world full of noise. Bob Dylan may have waited 60 years to speak on Neil Young, but when he finally did, he didn't need many words. Just a single metaphor, one that burned with meaning. Because sometimes the greatest respect isn't shouted. It's whispered, or left unsaid until the moment truly matters. And when it came, Dylan's words weren't just a compliment. They were a quiet torch passed from one legend to another. In an age of noise, clout, and endless commentary, Dylan chose restraint. A line, a truth, a legacy sealed in flame. If you followed the long, winding paths of Dylan and Young, you know this wasn't just a quote. It was a closing chapter to a silent story shared in glances, lyrics, and parallel journeys. Subscribe for more untold stories from music legends. What do you think Dylan meant by a flame? Let us know in the comments below. And if you love music history, don't forget to like and share.